Okay, moving on to item F, new business. Item number 1, hearing on the extension of the temporary suspension for mixed martial artist Conor McGregor for possible action. Good morning, Deputy Attorney General Bateman. How are you?
Good morning, Chairman. How are you?
Good.
Good morning, members of the Commission. My name is Caroline Bateman from the Attorney General's Office. I am here on behalf of Executive Director Bennett on items 1, 2, and 3 as new business on your agenda this morning. Regarding agenda item 1 as new business, in October of 2018, Respondent McGregor was licensed by the Nevada State Athletic Commission as a professional mixed martial artist. On October 6, 2018, upon the completion of the main event of UFC 229, multiple fights erupted at the T-Mobile Arena. Video evidence reveals that Respondent climbed the cage and attempted to jump over it towards a fight that was occurring outside the cage, and notably behind the blockade stanchions where members of the public were seated and were standing. The quick work of the Commission's inspectors prevented Respondent from jumping over the cage. However, while sitting on top of the cage and being held by the inspectors, Respondent made multiple attempts to strike an individual who was also attempting to jump out of the cage. Pursuant to NRS 467.117, Executive Director Bennett temporarily suspended Respondent's license on October 15th for a period of 10 days. I ask that you extend that suspension through the resolution of the formal disciplinary action. While Executive Director Bennett is still working on his investigation, it cannot be disputed that Respondent's actions on the night of October 6th reflected discredit to unarmed combat and constitutes unsportsmanlike conduct in violation of the Commission's statutes and regulations. Respondent's actions also constitute violations of the law of the state of Nevada. The disciplinary complaint will be filed upon the completion of the Executive Director's investigation, and he anticipates it will be ready for the Commission's review and hearing during your December meeting. Proper notice of this meeting was provided pursuant to NRS 233B.121 and NRS 467.113, with a certified letter being mailed to Respondent on October 10th to the address provided to the Commission. And I will open to any questions that members of the Commission may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Bateman at this time? No questions? Are there any representatives here, or Mr. McGregor, or any representatives from Mr. McGregor? Do you care to speak today or no?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. For the record, that's Michael Mersch, representative for Conor McGregor. Okay, well, I would entertain a motion per the Deputy Attorney General's recommendation.
I make a motion for the Deputy Attorney General's recommendation for new business item number 1.
Recommendation to?
Oh, I'm sorry, to extend the temporary suspension for mixed martial artist Conor McGregor.
Great, thank you. Do I have a second? Second. Great, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously.
Aye.
For emphasis. Moving on to item number 2, new business number 2, hearing on the extension of the temporary suspension for mixed martial artist Khabib Nurmagomedov for possible action.
Good morning again, Chairman. In October of 2018, Respondent was licensed by the Nevada State Athletic Commission as a professional mixed martial artist. On October 6, 2018, upon completion of the main event of UFC 229 at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Respondent jumped out of the cage and jumped into the gallery where members of the public were seated or standing, and he struck one or more individuals standing in that gallery. Pursuant to NRS 467.117, Executive Director Bennett temporarily suspended Respondent's license on October 15th for a period of 10 days. I ask that you extend that suspension through the resolution of the formal disciplinary action. As with Mr. McGregor's case, while Executive Director Bennett is still working on his investigation, there is no dispute that Respondent's action reflected discredit to unarmed combat and constitutes unsportsmanlike conduct in violation of this Commission's statutes and regulations. Respondent's actions were the catalyst for the ensuing chaos that occurred after his contest at UFC 229. And Respondent's actions also constitute violations of the laws of the state of Nevada. The disciplinary complaint will be filed upon the completion of the executive director's investigation into this matter. And again, he anticipates it will be ready for the commission's review and hearing during your December meeting. Proper notice of this hearing was provided to the respondent pursuant to NRS 233B.121 and NRS 467.113, with a certified letter being mailed to the respondent on October 10th, 2018 to the address provided to the commission. And I'm available to answer any questions the commissioners may have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions of the Attorney General on new business item number 2? Okay, no questions? Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
So, motion to approve the Attorney General, item number 2, to extend the suspension of Khabib Nurmagomedov.
You said that better than I did. Okay, I'd look for a second.
Second.
Great, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, great, motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to item number 3. So we're gonna let, before I even call it, so the commission understands, I'm gonna let Attorney General go through this, and then I'm sure there'll be questions and some thoughts and some discussion. Before we move to that, though, I would like to make it clear for the record for both counsel for Mr. McGregor and Mr. Nurmagomedov, doesn't seem to have representation. They both need to be noticed that in the December hearing, I will require them to personally appear. I will not waive the personal appearance. So they have plenty of time. UFC, different camps for visas, etc. If you run into visa issues, then you need to communicate that with Executive Director Bennett, and we'll figure out how to work around that, but I'm not going to do that hearing over the telephone. Okay, so let's move on to new business item number 3. I will call that hearing on the withholding of the purse from the UFC 229 event at T-Mobile Arena on October 6, 2018 for mixed martial artist Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Good morning again, Chairman, members of the Commission. On October 6, 2018, following the completion of the UFC 229 main event and observing the actions of the respondent, Executive Director Bennett, under his authority pursuant to NRS 467.135, ordered that respondent's purse be withheld based on his violations of the Commission's rules and regulations. Pursuant to the requirements of NRS 467.135, the Commission, by and through Chairman Marnell, immediately scheduled the present hearing to determine whether respondent's purse will be withheld and turned over to the Commission by the UFC pending final action in the respondent's disciplinary matter. Pursuant to NRS 467.158, when disciplinary action is taken against a person related to and taken in conjunction with a contest of unarmed combat, the Commission may impose a maximum fine of 100% of the purse and impose a lifetime ban from participation in unarmed combat in Nevada. I'm not implying that that is what the Commission will do in this matter, but I did want to provide the Commission with that information, that that is the extent that is available to you based on your review of the disciplinary matter in December. And hopefully that will give you some guidance in terms of whether or not you will be choosing to withhold the purse today, and if so, what amount you will be withholding. Based on the possibility of that full 100% purse fine, based on the completion of the disciplinary hearing, I would request that the purse that's currently been withheld remain in place, and that the UFC be ordered to transfer that purse to the Commission for safe holding pending resolution of the disciplinary matter. And I'm available to answer any questions the Commissioners may have.
I do have one question for you. I just want to make sure I'm clear in reading the reg. So if I'm referring to section 17 of the LCB file number R-062-16, the interpretation of purse is not just the Fight Night check, but also including all pay-per-view and other. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chairman Marnell. I would note that in terms of our previous history with disciplinary complaints, and it's not determinative here, but in terms of our anti-doping actions that this Commission has taken, we have utilized the Fight Night payment as the purse calculation. So it would be, that would be my recommendation, but it wouldn't be outside your scope if you did want to interpret that provision to include pay-per-view as well.
Okay. I don't necessarily disagree with you at this juncture, but I guess we'll get to that in December. I just want to make clear for the record what the scope of the commission's abilities are to deal with what we're dealing with. Am I also correct in saying that if I'm looking at, so it really boils down to NRS 0105 as the definition of purse, and then what regulation am I looking at that allows the commission to impose the lifetime ban?
And Commissioner, that would be NRS 467.135.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, understood that. So again, just want to make that clear for the record. That it's all in play. And I want to also, the third question, and then I'll turn it over to the other commissioners, is that when looking at past practice of the commission for acts of misconduct, which there has been not a lot, but a few over the years, are we to ignore past practice prior to 2016, since all of those misconduct violations fell under old regulations? And are we to solely focus on the new regulations and NRS, the NRS .0105 and NRS 467.135 as all of that pertains to the new regs that were amended in 16? Or is there precedence from things that happened prior to that that we should be looking at? I just want to make sure, as in context to what we're doing today, not hearing the two cases, but as it pertains to this purse and what we're withholding at the moment, how far back are we allowed to look? Because the last thing I want is to be accused of being arbitrary, capricious, and all over the place. I want to follow the law as written.
And if I may, Chairman, correct myself regarding the authority for the lifetime ban and the 100% fine. That was actually NRS 467.158. I think I mistakenly said 135.
Okay.
And in terms of the purse and the calculation of the purse, if I'm understanding you correctly, you want to know in terms of the disciplinary action that would come about based on this case, what
We've had other incidences prior to 16.
Yes.
We've had camps enter the ring and fight each other. We've had people bite each other's ears off. We've had some stuff. Are we to look at what commissions did back in history at that time and use that as precedent to try to develop a scope around this situation? Or are we really to look at the regs as adopted in 16 and what they say we're allowed to do from that point forward, because it is a much different reg today than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago?
And Chairman, my recommendation would be to look into past practice of the commission. That is based on the fact that the regulations that we adopted in 2016 were focused primarily on anti-doping violations, and so it provides strict guidance to the commission in terms of fines and purse percentages and suspension periods that the commission can now rely on. In terms of disciplinary actions such as these, there is no specific language in our new regulations or our old regulations that provide that strict guidance. And so looking at past practice, although it's not binding on this commission, would provide some guidance to you, again, to avoid, as you said, any arguments that the commission is being arbitrary and capricious.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions. I would turn it over if any of the fellow commissioners have any questions for Attorney General Bateman, and then we can have some discussion.
I just want to add a little bit to the chairman's narrative. If I recall history correctly, it was right after 2000 that the guidelines changed to up to 100% of the purse. So it still feels like that there is a to the chairman's point, a time period that we should consider for past practices. Obviously, pre-2000, I think at the max was 10% of purse. So does that sound familiar to you or accurate that that period of time post-2000 is the parameters that allows us to go to 100%?
Correct. Yes, yes, Commissioner. I would recommend going through and looking at when the statute was changed, what allowed for when it was 250,000, and then it changed to 100% of the purse, so it's the maximum of whichever is greater, and that's the guidance I would recommend for the commission to look at.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. And to reconfirm, is there any representation for Mr. Nurmagomedov? Okay. I guess then I would close the hearing. Executive Director Bennett, do you have anything to add to the event, the night, anything that would be in the Commission's interest for them to know as you and I made this decision on the spot and how we got there? And I have a little bit of color that I'd like to add, but would you like to go first, or do you have anything you'd like to add?
Chairman, I would only say that based on the actions that took place that evening, we took the appropriate action in so much as immediately placing him on 10-day suspension and withholding Khabib's purse. Other than what was commented on today, I have nothing else to add based on my investigative efforts, which will be forthcoming.
Okay. The only thing that I would add when the event was over, as Executive Director Bennett, was looking at the media that we had available to us at the moment. As you all know, once the fight's over, the checks get handed out pretty fast. It kind of dissipates quickly, people leaving the building, etc. I would put in there for the record, if I would have had the video that we now have, I would have also held Mr. McGregor's purse. I did not have the video at the time and could not see the action of going up onto the cage. So anyway, here we are today. So the only other thing that I'd like to ask the Commission, in taking into account what the Attorney General has given us with past practice, regulations, and how this moves, I'm open to entertaining discussion that we would release some of this purse. I think the total compensation for Mr. Nurmagomedov is well in excess of the $2 million. I believe it's somewhere in the $5 to $6 million range, all things considered, which we can entertain and put in our purview. Not that it's necessarily past practice, but what happened is not past practice either. This is the first time. So I think we do need to consider history as it pertains to how much of the purse we want to withhold until the hearing. But we also need to entertain the actions of the evening and where we sit today. In hearing all of that, I'm open to reducing the amount of withholding and releasing some of the money to Mr. Nurmagomedov to, pay his corners, pay the people that need to get paid. And that's the intention of this statute and this regulation, is to have an immediate hearing to determine after the emotion of the moment and the night and what happened and what we did, to quickly decipher if that was the correct action, or if we withheld too much, or if we think we withheld the proper amount, then to hold on to it and proceed forward to December. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So I would entertain conversation on what the commissioners think.
Executive Director Bennett, are we in receipt of the funds currently, or are they still with UFC?
Commissioner Alonso, currently we are in possession of the check from the UFC for $2 million.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, I think it would be appropriate to release some of the funds to pay for some of the incidentals that were involved in the event, especially when we didn't have the knowledge that we have now regarding Conor McGregor, and that camp probably would have been subjected to some of the things that we've done with Khabib. So I would like to see us move forward on that.
Okay. Ms. Beth?
Yeah, just that we hold enough of the funds to give us that latitude to make decisions in December based off of the actions that occurred, because there were public safety issues involved and other serious infractions.
Commissioner Alonso, do you have any thoughts?
I would agree with Commissioner Macbeth and support his view.
Okay. Commissioner Hahn on the phone, do you have any comments on the dialogue you've heard?
No, I mean, I concur with the theme and the spirit of the dialogue, and I think us entertaining releasing a portion of this is probably appropriate given the information that we've gathered since then and the spirit of some of your comments.
Okay. So now the $44 million question is how much? What would the commission like to do? I mean, I have some thoughts. The fighter clearly is going to receive, substantial amount of money for the fight. We'll get to all of that in December as far as what that will wind up being, but I'm comfortable at this point, releasing half of it. One of the questions that I do have, though, for the Attorney General, I'm not comfortable because these complaints have not been filed. The suspensions have only been handed out, I think, as recently as yesterday. I'm assuming I cannot tie the camp's compensation to his. I'm concerned on the compensation of the camps. We do have a past practice where camps have come in to the, let's call it the field where the contest is being held, had these types of issues, and were also fined. I am concerned about that particular situation and their compensation that will come directly from the release of this check, or a portion of this check. And I'm not going to say necessarily I'm concerned about flight risk, but we do have occasional issues with international fighters that get fined and never come back, and we never collect the state never collects its fine. So in doing our fiduciary duty to the state of Nevada as commissioners of the Athletic Commission, is there a way we can do that? I'm assuming the answer is no, and we will have to deal with those independently. And if you need a moment, I will happily pause the hearing if you would like to look, because that's a kind of a last minute question on you, I understand. It's not an easy one.
And Chairman, pursuant to NRS 467.135, and that is the statute that governs withholding parts or of a purse or other monies. Subsection 1 of that statute reads as follows: the commission is executive director or any other employee authorized by the commission may order the promoter to withhold any part of a purse or other money belonging or payable to any contestant, manager, or second. It's in the judgment of the commission, executive director, or other employee, and there's a litany of actions that you can base that withholding on. Based on that clear language in the statute, I would state that the withholding could be ordered against contestants, managers, or seconds only. So if there were other parties associated with the event that you are seeking, and the executive director, through his investigation, may identify as participating in these events and being subject to disciplinary action, unless they fall within those 3 categories, they could not be subject to the purse withholding. There's nothing here that requires necessarily that it happened that night, unless, obviously it's more difficult when the purse was already released, as you know, Chairman. So it would be possible, but it would be in order to the promoter to withhold, and then we would all come back and have another hearing like we are right now.
Okay, I don't see how that would work for what I'm trying to accomplish at this time, because I don't believe that they're under our jurisdiction, but I don't believe that they're under the promoter as it pertains to compensation. I think that's going to come directly from the fighter. So I think that would get a little bit out of bounds. So, all right, well, we'll have to deal with that when it comes then. Okay, well, I guess I have a very specific motion that I'd like to use. I think what it really would boil down to now is how much of the $2 million fight night check would the commission like to withhold out of the $2 million? I have felt half was a good enough amount of money to release $1 million that should cover all expenses, get the fighters some money, but at the same time, it's still a very substantial amount of money to be withheld until we can get to the case in December and get all of the testimony, or potentially we get a settlement agreement. Who knows where all that will go over the next 60 days. But it's enough money to keep this contestant's interest in this hearing.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Vaughn, I concur with that. I think it's reasonable, fair, and prudent given the circumstances and the decisions that we have faced.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would also concur that withholding 50% of a $2 million purse is substantial and leaves us the flexibility in December to come to the final resolution.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it puts the boat in the water.
Well, yeah. And to be clear, the fighter's still going to receive close to $4.5 million that's not going to be subjected to his disciplinary action in total compensation, fight night, and pay-per-view. So I think that it rides with 50% of the purse on fight night. It rides with less than 20% of the total compensation. And for now, I'm comfortable with that amount until we get to all the evidence and have the full hearing. So what I would say is I would entertain a motion pursuant to NRS 467-135 and NAC 467-147 to order the UFC to continue to withhold the payment to Khabib Nurmagomedov of $1 million of his purse from UFC 229, and part 2, to order the UFC to transfer $1 million withheld from Mr. Nurmagomedov's purse to the Nevada State Athletic Commission for safekeeping pending the resolution of the relevant disciplinary action against Mr. Nurmagomedov.
That's fine.
For the record, that was Mr. Ratner from the UFC. So I would entertain a motion to approve. What I've just read into the record as the motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
You
Second.
Yeah.
Aye.
Sorry, I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you.